I want to bring in NBC's Melanie Zanona, who's covering Capitol Hill. Former Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Charlie Dent is the executive director of the Aspen Institute Congressional Program. Paul Butler is a former federal prosecutor, Georgetown law professor, and MSNBC legal analyst. So, Melanie, this is your reporting about the way the president is dealing with all of this behind the scenes. Tell us more about what you found out.
Yeah, behind the scenes, President Donald Trump has been fuming about this fiasco. I'm told that in multiple conversations yesterday, Trump specifically said he was frustrated with Michael Waltz, his national security advisor, for inadvertently adding that Atlantic reporter to the Signal group chat, with Trump complaining about the media coverage and complaining that this has now become a multi-day controversy for the White House. I'm told that in those same conversations, Trump has also complained about another matter related to Michael Waltz, and that is the race to replace him in Congress. There's going to be a special election next week for that seat. It's a district that Trump won by 30 points, but the race has become a lot more competitive for Republicans than it should be, with the candidate there being massively outraised by his Democratic opponent, forcing GOP leaders and Trump to have to swoop in at the 11th hour here to help revive his campaign, with Trump even doing a teletown hall last night for the candidate there, Randy Fine. Now, GOP leadership is confident that Randy Fine will still win on Tuesday. But all of this has really added to the frustrations behind the scenes that Trump has with Michael Waltz, even though that race is not necessarily Michael Waltz's fault.
Okay, Congressman, what's your sense of how politics are playing into the president's decision about whether someone should lose their job over this, as opposed to the national security concerns that a lot of people have?
Well, the president's right to be concerned about both the politics and the national security implications of what's happened. I think in any other administration, somebody would have been fired. I don't know if it would have been the national security advisor or the defense secretary, but somebody probably would have been fired. And the administration has made this issue much bigger than it should have with their defense, just trying to blame Jeffrey Goldberg and making a lot of noise that this wasn't classified. Anybody with a pair of eyes and ears knows that this was a major screw up. That this type of conversation should have been conducted over secure channels or in a SCIF at the very least. And they're really trying to defend the indefensible. And it's having political implications and certainly national security implications. So they made a big mistake. But by the way they're arguing this, they're continuing to make this a bigger story than perhaps it needs to be. And on the politics, too, yeah, like they're nervous, too. They see their numbers deteriorating. You know, Mike Waltz's seat is at risk. That should be a layup for the Republicans. And it's a very competitive race. They just lost, Republicans just lost a race in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I mean, the political environment is deteriorating right now.
Well, Politico, Congressman, is reporting that among Republicans, there's an even bigger concern, maybe, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. This is part of what they write. Because Trump clearly likes and has publicly exonerated Hegseth, you're not going to hear a huge public outcry, according to a senior GOP official on Capitol Hill who is close to the White House. But that official said, privately, there's a lot of concern about his judgment more than with Waltz. And another person close to the White House said, what happens when he has to manage a real crisis? Are you surprised we're not hearing more about this publicly? I mean, Republicans were for so many decades the national security party.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of fair criticism of the defense secretary because of what he actually said in that Signal chat. I mean, he talked about the timing of a military operation. He said a lot of things that should never have been said on some app, some commercial app. It's a mistake. And I am certain, I know many of these Republican members, and they are serious about national security. I am sure they are mortified by what has happened. Had this occurred with a Democratic administration, many of these same members would be setting themselves on fire right now in protest of this. So right now, I think Republicans are very embarrassed by this whole situation and are going to need to find their voices publicly to express their concern.
Paul, let's move on to the lawsuit. Pam Bondi obviously not happy with the choice of the judge, but what is it about and what will the judge have to determine?
So the Federal Records Act requires that officials preserve communications related to government business. If there's anything on a messaging app, it has to be saved by screenshots or some other way. And we know from the transcript of the group chat, you can see that Waltz set some of the messages to disappear after 1 week, some after 4 weeks. So the lawsuit's a preemptive strike to make sure that none of the chat is deleted. Judge Boasberg pointed out that nobody in the lawsuit is asking for the communications to be disclosed. No one's asking for any of the officials to be penalized. They just want the Federal Records Act enforced so that the full record is preserved.
Paul, we heard Attorney General again attack Judge Boasberg, but I want to play what former Attorney General turned Republican Senator Ashley Moody had to say about all this on Fox today.
We have to do something about this. I personally have spoken with other members in Congress that know something needs to be done. And what that looks like, whether that's, taking that jurisdiction out of the hands of these federal judges or maybe putting it to a specialty court. I think there should be a rocket docket so these things can be reviewed immediately by an appellate court when it's a matter of national interest. So all of these things I think folks are talking about, and I do think that you'll see a lot of action from Congress.
To the inexperienced ear, Paul, that sounds like she's asking for a remake of the way the judiciary has worked for a very long time. But you tell me what you hear and what power Congress might even have in all of this.
So Congress has already acted with laws like the Presidential Records Act, the Federal Government Records Act, and also the Espionage Act. Under the Espionage Act, people can be charged with mishandling national defense information. Historically, prosecutors only bring cases if there's evidence of a deliberate intent to mishandle sensitive information. And Chris, you and I talked a lot about the investigations, the federal criminal investigations of former President Biden and Hillary Clinton for violations of that act. But the Attorney General said she doesn't think that a criminal investigation of this matter is warranted. She says because the information wasn't classified. And that's kind of weird because typically information regarding military plans, timing, procedure is classified.
So, Congressman, this morning, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who has a little bit of national security and foreign policy experience, she traveled over 100 countries in that role, called the Signal chat the latest in a string of stupid, self-inflicted wounds by the Trump administration. She clearly has the right to speak out. She has the resume to back it up. But politically speaking, do you think it helps advance the ball here for the Democratic case, or does she just make it easier for Republicans to dismiss all of this and say it's a witch hunt, this is a partisan attack, and we're the victims here?
Well, I can certainly understand the former secretary's outrage by it. After all, she was keelhauled for her own missteps with that private server. So she got herself in her own trouble. But that said, she's not wrong to say that this administration made a really dumb mistake. I mean, Jeffrey Goldberg should not have been added to that chat. That was a terrible error. And Pete Hegseth should not have shared some of the things he said in that chat in this, this app that is a commercial app. It's clearly made mistakes, and so she's piling on, and that's certainly her right, given what she has been through. But it's going to become a major issue. But we should also know too that Senator Roger Wicker, very serious, thoughtful Republican, head of the Armed Services Committee, wants an independent investigation conducted by the Inspector General of the Defense Department.
Do you think he'll get it?
It's a fair request. Well, he and Jack Reed have asked for it, and this is what inspectors generals should do. They should look at this, and I think that's an appropriate place to conduct a fair, nonpartisan investigation. So I think that's where this should go, and I'm sure there'll be others looking at this. Certainly, the records is another issue, and the judges are looking at that. But this is where it should go. Let the inspectors generals do it. But this administration has been very harsh on inspectors general. They've fired many of them. And these people are charged with trying to weed out waste, fraud, and abuse in a nonpartisan way.
Melanie Zanona and Paul Butler, thank you, Congressman. You are staying with us.